he's obviously come from Celtic. So he was the Celtic manager. A lot of Celtic since this news broke about Ange Postecoglou leaving Celtic to go to Spurs. And it begs a big question that I have for you now as a friend, as a fellow football fan. A lot of the Celtic fans are saying that they don't understand why Ange Postecoglou would leave Celtic for Tottenham Hotspur because Celtic are the bigger club. Now, do you have any initial reactions? What is your? Because because I'll be completely honest. I think I agree. I
don't agree. I think that, and I know that as for the listeners, obviously, maybe to let you into the behind the curtain of podcasts, we talk about things before we press record. So
whoa, what?
Yeah, I know.
Breaking the fourth wall, everybody.
I know, yeah. There's a bit of pre-production, even when it's just three lads talking nonsense. There's always a little bit of pre-production. And Cal did kind of bring this up, and I did make a point. And I think that I've had 14 minutes now to have a think, and I don't agree. But I do think that when you talk about when you said, Celtic a bigger club than Spurs, I'm being defensive of Spurs, but I also am being defensive of, I think, what is the Premier League. I do not think the Scottish League in any way can compare. Now, when we've mentioned things like that's not their fault, I get that. You could say, it's not Celtic's fault that, they're in a two-team league and there's no money in it. No, but at the same time, isn't some of these things what are the levels what you say big? You could say, who's got a bigger fan base? Okay, well, who's got more money? Well, who's got a better stadium? Who's won more who's won more trophies? Who's done this? It's like, well, yeah, but what do you consider that to be? And in my opinion, although I am obviously, first of all, defending my club when I say that I don't necessarily think Celtic are a bigger club. You can probably pose me 3 or 4 categories where you can say, well, they're bigger in this way, that way, that way. I'm like, yeah, but I could say, well, why weren't Celtic considered for the European Super League? That nonsense. Why were Celtic or Rangers not considered for that? Because, and that's what I'm saying, but it is a nebulous concept. There's people that are going to say...
That is quite a recent thing, isn't it? I think we're talking size of football clubs. And
there's no time better than the present. There's no time more than the present.
Here's an example. Alexis McAllister's just left Brighton to sign for Liverpool. They're both in the same competition next year. It's just a bigger club, isn't it? He wants to play for the bigger club. There's a better chance of going forward, doing something.
Yeah, but you can't compare. I don't think you can compare Brighton and Liverpool to the
what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. Using that as an example, is the term "bigger club." It does exist. It's not just a concept in our brain. It's there, isn't it? People choose to go to play for bigger clubs or to manage bigger clubs. Things like this all the time. So the question is, who is the bigger club? And obviously, as recency suggests, a lot of managers leave Scotland when they do well to come over to the Premier League. So that would argue Premier League's a bigger place to be. But in terms of
money, isn't it?
Football heritage, exactly. So that's a money move, something that enhances their reputation and their bank balance. But in terms of the history of a football club, you walk out at Celtic Park, it's a famous place, isn't it? And it's seen so many amazing moments. They won a Champions League trophy. It's for me, I don't know. You've just built a new stadium. I think it's 2,000 more capacity than Celtic Park, for one. So there's that. So the grounds aren't too dissimilar. Obviously, loads of high-tech things at Spurs. But Celtic Park's got that Anfield thing about it. Got, that heritage Old Trafford thing about it. So the grounds aren't that different. Football trophy winning-wise, it's not even a conversation, is it? In terms of that.
But that's not really fair at all. You cannot, because literally, I tell you what, let's just say...
You've both been in the Champions League for several years, and one of them's won one and one of them hasn't.
When did Celtic last win it? I just want to know.
60s, wasn't it?
70s or 60s.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But I just think that, of course, it makes for really good viewing. But for me, it is nebulous because, I know what you're saying, but at the same time, you've kind of summed up for me what would be a bigger club. You've just said there, Cal, Alexis McAllister wants to go from Brighton to Liverpool. Postecoglou wants to go from Celtic to Spurs. Now, we can debate, well, he's done it for this reason. That was like, no. you have to lump them in all together, or you have to kind of wipe the slate clean. Because with me, Celtic, right, put Spurs, right, let's just say this. Say that you had to win a league 10 times to get promoted. Put Spurs in the Championship, right? Are Spurs going to win the Championship? Now, we can all joke about, the bottle jobs and all that, but at the same time, let's make Spurs the best club in a league by the kind of margins that Celtic are. And then you can say, well, they're the biggest club because they're the biggest club. Yeah, but they've got more money than any other club. So,
well, that's not their fault, though, is it?
No, that's what I'm saying. You can't
in.
say it's not Spurs' fault that they're in the league, in a much more competitive league. It's not
Spurs' fault. You're using Celtic's league to jab at them in this debate on who's a bigger football club. But it's like look at the Spanish clubs. There's two
of course, but I have to have. That's my foundation. Yeah, that's my foundation. I know we're saying that, but that's my foundation. My foundation is taking a jab at their league, because that is the same way that if Spurs were in a league where they were one of the top two clubs, and you would arguably say, yeah, well, we're in one now. City definitely are, but I think that in the Premier League, it's a lot more exciting. And you can say, oh, it's down to TV, it's down to money. It's like, no, but it's also been down to the football that's been played. Maybe Scotland's a smaller country, but it's like you can kind of say, oh, they're a smaller country. It's not their fault. It's like, well, it's not Spurs' fault that we were North London. God, how many teams would love to have moved to Scotland to try and compete in that 2-horse race? It's like,
we're not arguing that.
What do you think,
from Belgium? Well, that sort of. I don't know if you argue a team from like Club Brugge from Belgium with two clubs at the top, but we're not arguing them because the size of Celtic is bigger. The fan base is bigger than Spurs. Spurs will overtake Celtic eventually. Give it time. Obviously, with the global reach that Spurs have now, with the stadium that they have now, with Beyonce's playing there, they have the best stadium in the world. Granted, 15 years time, when Spurs do finally win a trophy, they will be close to Celtic, but right now because of what Celtic's done 60s, 70s and 80s to build that fan base. For now, they have a bigger fan base.
Well, Spurs were the first team to do the domestic double, but that was in the fucking 60s. We were the first team to do the domestic double, but no one ever talks about that. I mean, apart from Spurs fans, because we've got nothing else to talk about at the moment.
Yeah, I'm a Blackburn fan. All we've got is we're the only club to do it 3 times in a row.
Exactly. But hang on, by that logic, Blackburn, right, who've won more Premier League trophies. Premier League. Let's forget this. When people win certain European cups, they weren't even called the Champions League. So let's call things what they were. Blackburn have won more Premier League trophies than Spurs. Now, I would argue this in a point. I'm not just saying to make a debate. Blackburn are a massive club, but because in the last 10 years,
you could say about City, though, can't you? You could say that about City, and City are a much smaller team than the two of them, aren't they? As in Spurs and Celtic.
Yeah.
But that's my point, is that there's so many different things to take into consideration. But that's kind of why it is a fun debate, because there is so many different aspects of it that make it up. And, you can latch on to fan base, this, that, and the other. Or you can latch on to, well, if you put a gun to people's head and said, who would you rather manage? Who would you rather play for? Where would you rather play and why? You're going to pick the Premier League over the Scottish League unless you're Scottish. Do you know what I mean? That's the argument I would base it on. You can base it on fan base, and that's one way of looking at it. And then you can base it on history. But history doesn't butter parsnips, really.
Well, I'm sure, doesn't history and big club doesn't that make the other? Doesn't the history...
I know, but obviously the joke here is, Cal, that was the running joke about Liverpool for a long, long time until they won the Premier League, was that they were
won the team. Champions League in 2005. We'd won domestic trophies. We've been in and around it. We're still winning trophies.
No, but what I'm saying is that was the running gag, wasn't it? It was the running gag that Liverpool were clinging on to history. But the joke was, a bit like with Spurs being a bottle job for the last, well, God knows however long it's been, is that, like, you can grab onto these tiny little things, but then there's always something you can grab onto. Like, well, Liverpool, I'm not trying to convince you. You know how big a club Liverpool is. I think Liverpool is arguably one of the biggest clubs in the world. Yeah, I'll concede that. Because I think because you take into consideration everything we're talking about. They play in the best league in the world. They've got, and the last sort of league, certainly, even though they've always been up there, the last 6 years probably got, I'd still say, I think he is the best manager because of what he did compared to what Pep had to do at City. I think what Klopp
did had more to do, didn't he?
Yeah, and I think that given that, I think Klopp is a better manager in some ways. I think Pep has shown himself to be incredible.
To bring it back to Celtic versus Spurs, though, final statements. Cal, you go first, then Charlie, and then... I'll give mine.
I didn't think it was a debate, to be honest. I thought when I mentioned it, I thought you'd be like, yeah, well, obviously, yeah. I don't know, Champions League victory for me. I always think that a Champions League trophy just adds so much to your club. You look at Aston Villa, Nottingham Forest, without these things, I don't think they'd be in conversations like that. But they are, because they won it and they had successful periods in history. So for me, yeah, I think Celtic are a far bigger club, and that's not in any slight whatsoever. I really do. I genuinely would say, in terms of stature of a football club, I'd say they're miles ahead. Yeah.
And to add on to that, Charlie, obviously you can go last. You could be the final. You could be the bullet. You could be the full stop to this debate. I also add that I think that success brings fan base also brings heritage alongside it. And I think that give it 50 years, we'll say that City are probably the biggest club in the world because they've won everything right now. But right now, they're not. They're not, are they? So, yeah, that's what I'll say. Charlie?
I think that, at the end of the day, talk about major trophies, winning the European Cup. Spurs did that in history. How far back we want to go is one thing. I would say I will happily concede that, given the circumstances in which they're in, Celtic are a bigger club in their sphere than Spurs are. I do think it is a little bit apples and pears in some ways, but I will concede that Celtic have got a massive, massive fan base. I admit that they have, and it isn't their fault that they're literally, they're a fucking racehorse in a three-legged dog competition, right? I'm not being funny, but that being said, I will happily say, to put my argument out, and I'm using Cal's words as well, put a gun to someone's head, Alexis McAllister, Postecoglou, anyone, Steven Gerrard, when he was at Rangers, where would you rather be in the game of? The Scottish Premier League or the English Premier League? And I think the answer is itself, and that the teams that are within that are why the clubs are bigger in overall. However, I'll accept that Celtic, because of who they are and where they are bigger individually, potentially, yes.
Okay. And let us know in the comments below. Obviously, this is a debate that we didn't think we were going to have till 5 minutes before the podcast. We're like, save it. Let us know, are Spurs bigger than Celtic? Are Celtic bigger than Spurs? Let us know any other debates that you want to have. Maybe Newcastle versus City, two sides that have got oil driven by them. Which one's bigger? Because that's another debate for another day. But yeah, cheers, guys. See you in a bit.
If you like what you've just seen there and you want to see more content like this, make sure you give us a like and a subscribe on YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TalkNonsensePod.